Now then, we're going to get in today, and we have my favorite guest here. May Brussell is here, one of your favorite. And they're a despicable group of people. But I don't think they're as dangerous as another group of people. It's because they're so obvious. Sure, they're in businesses, they're in corporations, but they are so ignorantly obvious in their hatred. They're not sly, they're not as cunning, nor are they as torturous or as devastating as a group that I think is our biggest villains in this country, and that's the Nazis. And every time the Nazis march in this country, the American Nazi Party, we should be doing something. And people say, well, they're not Nazis. These are these young people that, that sort of believe something, and they enjoy dressing up in these stormtroopers. Listen, it was the 6 Nazis that beat me up the night of the Dan White riot with the chains, and I'm still limping, and had to have a little tumor removed. And I know, don't tell me Nazis, I know Nazis. And I've been doing some research. There was a marvelous program about them the other night on TV, and I actually was watching TV to see it because it was terrific. Some information from that program, which I was very surprised to get on the air, I'm going to talk to you about, and just lay out just a few things that you should know about. I know you think the Nazis are just a handful of 9 fools in a truck shouting slogans just to make us mad. Well, that's not so. There are a lot of little bunds. There's a lot of little groups of Nazis running around doing that. But there's lots of Nazis in this country who are doing other things. And the most important thing is there are a lot of very influential people who are deciding things about your life and what is happening to you, who are Nazis. Hitler Nazis, and a great many of them are ex-SS members of Hitler's regime. They're old, a lot of them, but they've been passing this down and passing it down, and they're all over the world. There are more than 200 Nazi war criminals living in America collectively right now who were responsible for the death of as many as 2 million people. Right this minute, here in the United States, more than 200 Nazi war criminals are living that we know of, that we can document, who are living collectively in America and responsible for the death of 2 million people. It's interesting how the Nazis and the Nazi collaborators got to the United States and how they managed to stay here. It's even evidence as to some of them have been requested, protected, and employed by the United States government. Now, some of them came in the guise of people that they killed in Germany, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia, wherever they were. Some of them took the identities of those people and came that way and sneaked in. But a great many of them were brought in by request and under the protection and the employment of the United States government. These are SS Nazi war criminals. These are people who were responsible for the death of millions of people. I know this sounds like I'm making this up, but it's true. It's true. There were millions of people murdered throughout Germany before and during World War II. And there were a lot of Nazis all about that were there in Latvia and Yugoslavia and Romania, and the gypsies were, so many of them were wiped out in the same fashion as Jews were. And the responsibility of the deaths of these millions who were in these countries such as Latvia and Yugoslavia and Romania were Nazi collaborators who had organized and who was under a thing called, if I can remember what they did call it now, the Iron Oh, wait a minute. I'll find it.
The Iron Guard.
The Iron Guard, you're right. The Iron Guard, May, that's it. They were under the Iron Guard, which was an arm of the SS in the other countries, you know. When the war ended, thousands of these murderers escaped, and the United States now is a haven for hundreds and thousands of these war criminals. The only country that has more Nazi war criminals from the SS war criminals than we have is Argentina and West Germany.
And Chile.
And Chile. They have more. We have the bulk.
Brazil. No, Brazil.
Brazil has them too. That's the only other countries that have them like that. They're here. We've got to examine how they got here, how they stayed here, and only now, 35, 40 years later, are they beginning to try to seek. Well, there's people who have been seeking them out and working toward this for all these years, but are they trying to prosecute them? There are people, these are people who are simply not just soldiers. I don't want you to think they were soldiers carrying out orders, because we keep saying, well, listen, I'm in the army and I was told to shoot somebody, that's my job. I'm not talking about the ordinary German soldier. I am talking about men who were in leadership positions and allegedly killed and were responsible for the killing and the operations of civilians. Of the more than 200 cases under investigation in the United States today, only 16 are now active. They know where there's 200 right now. Boom. Got all the information about them. But only 16 cases are active. And only 16 are in litigation. And those involve Eastern Europeans responsible for deaths in their own countries who are part of this Iron Guard. Let me give you one case in point, and we're going to get to May, and May is going to give you all the scoop for that. Let me just lay the groundwork for this. One of the men that I can talk about, and a good example of that, involves the charges against Valrinian Tripa. Now, he's an American citizen today, and he is the Archbishop of the Romanian Orthodox Church. The Archbishop of the Romanian Orthodox Church, an American citizen. Bishop Tripa now lives in Michigan. He stands now charged, if convicted, I doubt it, but stands charged with crimes committed over 40 years ago, halfway around the world. But he's been here all this time. He got his American citizenship. He slaughtered Romanians by the hundreds, and hundreds of Jews in 1941. He was the terror of the Iron Guard. Tripa was a student leader at that time of the Iron Guard and the blacklist, lista de negra as they called it, to eliminate all Jews. And in 1941 he had a program. Over 200 Jews were slaughtered in a slaughterhouse by this man who was in charge, Tripa. Their bodies were mutilated, they were tortured, and they were hung up on hooks like meat. And that includes children as well as women. Men, women, and children. By the time the program was over, people started looking for Tripa, and they tried to find him. The people of Romania, they were after him to kill him. He had slipped with his Iron Guard people across the border and had joined Hitler and joined Hitler's forces in the SS. He was tried in absentia and was sentenced to life at hard labor. But by that time, as I say, he had fled. With his Iron Guard, he fled to Germany to openly work for Hitler. Since 1950, Tripa, this man, has lived in the United States safely. He's a former theological student, and he was elected and ordained a bishop of the Romanian Episcopal Church, and now resides and presides as the bishop of this church in Grassland, Michigan.
Did you know that Richard Nixon invited him to give a prayer at the Senate?
Yes, he did. Richard Nixon. He gave the opening prayer for the United States Senate in 1955.
And a few weeks ago, he was on Radio Free Europe, and they said they didn't know he was a war criminal.
That's right. He also has broadcast over the government-sponsored Radio Free Europe. The U.S. Justice Department is going to try to bring him to count, to strip him of his citizenship and send him back across the seas. But what will happen to the deaths of all these Romanians? It's a little late now. The Tripa case is similar to the 16 others that are now in litigation around this country. There are 16 others. But he's been living there all this time. Let me give you one more, and then we're going to get into some things that I'm going to let May take over here. Another Romanian, Nicolae Malaxa, was a well-known Nazi collaborator, a wealthy industrialist, and was a partner in the munitions business with the brother of Hermann Göring. Now, their factories turned out weapons for war machines. He was a high member in the Romania in the financial districts, and he was a high member of the Nazis and of the Nazi Iron Guard. He was one of the leaders in the murdering attack of Romanian Jews also. 1941, in a forest in Bucharest, just outside of Bucharest, hundreds of Jews, men and women and children, were killed and their bodies mutilated. And the financial support for this murder came from Nicolae Malaxa. Prosecutor now says he can't say why actions have not been taken against these known Nazis. No one in the government tried them at all, and someone asked him, said, well, you knew who they are. They've been here. There's 200 cases that you know of. Why hasn't the government done something about it? Because we did promise after the Nuremberg trial that we would seek out Nazi criminals and try them. And the prosecutor for our country said, I don't know. He says, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, what kind of effort do you think our government has made to seek these people out and do something? And he answered, on a scale of 1 to 10, he'll give the government a weak 2. They were invited to this country in various peoples of high places, and no action was taken against them. Now, here's one that I know May knows about, we're going to get into.
Before you go to the next one,
yeah.
Can I add something to Nicolae Malaxa?
Sure.
In the book Wanted, Search for the Nazis by Howard Bloom, that came out a few years ago. But before that came out, in 1972, when I wrote the article, Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped? That was my first published article after 7 years research. And I said that Richard Nixon was a cover in Long Island before he was put in the House of Representatives by Howard Hughes, the Bank of America. His role was to assist in bringing the Nazis to this country. Mm-hmm. And my links of Nixon to the Nazis was the first published article that I know of in the United States, if not in the world. Then Bloom came out with this story. The same person that called Richard Nixon and said, do you want to run for House of Representatives, come back to Whittier, was the same person that brought Nicolae Malaxa, but he came to Richard Nixon's law office in Whittier, California, the head of the Iron Guard. And Adolph Burl, the man who brought him from the State Department...
Thomas Buehling brought... well, all right, go ahead.
But Adolph Burl, B-E-R-L-E, is the man who was in charge of the State Department papers to bring Malaxa to Nixon's office, was the same man who worked with Richard Nixon to prosecute Alger Hiss. Mm-hmm. And I had said that Whittaker Chambers was also part of this German network to set up Nixon's career. It escalated Nixon's career. It nailed what Alger Hiss was doing, and Whittaker Chambers was working for Lifetime for Henry Luce and this network of spies. But he went directly to that office and set up a dummy front called Western Tube, then went down to Argentina to the Odessa, which is the worldwide Nazi organization, and then later there's a ball of wax because from Argentina came a man who later went to the Minsk radio factory where Lee and Marina Oswald met. And Kennedy, after Kennedy's assassination, then Nixon becomes president of the United States. He had lost to John Kennedy. There's a whole globe from Romania to New York to Whittier, California, to Argentina to Minsk, then Nixon back into the White House. It only took a few years, but the Nazi, this Nicolae Malaxa with the worldwide Odessa, being put in by the Bank of America and Howard Hughes
course.
was in his law office in Whittier, California.
Yes, this is true, because he had Western Tube, which was the company.
This was the business partner.
They were supposed to be making seamless tubes, which were...
It was a cover. They didn't make anything.
They didn't do anything because the thing never was under construction.
No.
It was to be built and to be concerned with American defense.
See, at the time we were at war in Korea in 1950,
That's right.
so they said, well, he'll help us with some construction, but he didn't do anything. He was part of the worldwide Odessa.
And he was supposed to be by Whittier, California, and it never happened. But Nixon and Maloxa were close enough, and Nixon went to his aid when the Immigration Service wanted to get him out. And there's letters signed by Nixon and sent by Nixon, and with his influence that Maloxa was an important person and should not be deported. And he was not deported. He stayed here in this country and died a millionaire. He was one of the butchers of Romania, but because of the influence of Nixon, he stayed in this country and died a millionaire. Now, those are two cases. He was not the only one with friends in high places. According to a General Accounting Office, our Washington General Accounting Office, it has all the documents that we have here. And now a lot of these documents have been found, and a lot of them have been made available because of the Information and Freedom Search. 7 alleged war criminals were employed by the CIA, and 1 by the Department of Defense, and 1 by the Department of State, in addition to 24 others, have some contact with CIA and FBI. The CIA and the FBI took these 24 Nazi war SS men and brought them in and put them to work for them to help them. And they've been helping all this since, because you see, what they wanted was, they said, their expertise to fight back at Russia, because at that time there was this thing about Russia. This is just the beginning to tell you of some of the Nazis that were here. I could go on. I've got several pages, and we're going to go on and find out about more of them. But we want you to know, what I'm trying to get across is, right now, a lot of the things that are happening because these Nazis now have positions of power in our country. And it's estimated that for every Nazi tried and executed, hundreds of them escaped. And they're somewhere. When Nuremberg was over, dozens executed, hundreds of convicted Nazis escaped. But even for every Nazi criminal convicted, 100 or more escaped in 1946, and the United States pledged to look for them and to seize them out for their crimes, and did not do that.
Did they really pledge to do it?
They did this under the Nuremberg. It's in the Nuremberg.
They pledged to look for them.
Yes, it's in the testimony of the Nuremberg trials that they pledged that they would seek out any Nazis and Nazi war criminals and bring them back to the countries to be tried from wherever. And of course they did not do that. They brought them here instead.
Boatloads.
In the boatloads. They invited them. They brought them here and set them up with identities. They brought them here and set them up in jobs, and they gave them jobs in the CIA and the FBI and in government,
Let me just make something clear, though, for the listeners, because I think we're on a broad subject, and I think one point should maybe be made perfectly clear, if I can do it. When you say we gave them jobs in the CIA, or that 7 war criminals are employed in the CIA, I would like to correct that and say that when Adolf Hitler saw that they were going to lose the war in Leningrad, and then 1943, May of 1943, Kaltenbrunner and Himmler and Heydrich, the top Nazis, had meetings that have been documented to go underground and form again the next Reich, that they would continue from a different terrain until they could take control of the world, try again. As soon as the war was over, before it was over in the spring of 1945, in April, before that was over, Chief of Intelligence of Eastern Division, Reinhard Gehlen, Hitler's top spy, top agent, had been meeting with Alan Dulles in Switzerland and in Italy. And this is documented in many, many books, Gehlen's Spy of the Century, and many books on Gehlen. And they made arrangements for Galen to come to the United States. So we had an OSS, which was our intelligence system. We never had a CIA. And Galen flew to the United States, but he'd only come dressed in a general's uniform and went to the Pentagon. And he designed for us. The United States had the executive, the judicial, the balance of power the Constitution had done, legislative. And he designed the National Security Council based from Hitler's government, his actual government, from 1933 on, so that Nazis not only were employed in the CIA, they formed the Central Intelligence Agency. It's not that 7 were employed. The whole design of the National Security Council was done by Hitler's chief of intelligence, and paralleling it, just to say, like J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI also had Nazi spies. J. Edgar Hoover was vice president of Interpol, which was the Nazi police with Kaltenbrunner and Heydrich, whose idea was for the final solution. He was vice president and came back and brought Hitler's network into the FBI. That's why they were always breaking labor groups, putting down the workers, looking for the communists, the working class, looking the other way with organized crime, the dope dealers and the Nazis. He didn't acknowledge any of them existed. And this is why they've been protected by the law, because our federal agency, J. Edgar Hoover, was a part of it. He was corresponding with the top Nazis until Pearl Harbor, and they said, cut off the correspondence because it's too obvious. He was part of that organization, which then moved with its list of future exterminations from Germany into France. The Interpol is still a dope-dealing Nazi connection that only busts a few people with marijuana. Interpol does nothing to get these people. And when it was formed...
They're great for fiction. And
they're great for fiction and James Bond movies. But to say that the CIA or the FBI employs Nazi war criminals, they were actually structured to exist.
Yeah, because one of the things that they did say why, and when they have, those that they have brought to trial, or they're working on now, the papers are there. We have the documents, and they are signed by people like Nixon and people in the FBI, people in high places of the CIA. And they justify it by the fact that Germans were so anti-communist, and these were brilliant people, scientists and all, and they wanted to bring them over here to help us to fight and get ready against the Germans. That's how they brought, and this figure is exact, I am not making this up, 900 German scientists to the United States under classified documentation.
642 paper clips?
For
642 of those, plus the other war criminals.
Makes 900.
Oh, yeah.
Makes 900. That's Project Paperclip, and you can get a book and read on this. You can write to the government, and you can get
any library.
And they had also Otto Farben Chemical Company. Otto Ambrose, who was a chemist. He was there. J.P. Grace, the ambassador to Germany. W.R. Grayson Company, there was one of your Nazis. There was one that is right now, that's in litigation now, and I don't think they'll ever get him, who happens to be his name is Simsikov, and I'm not sure the pronunciation of his first name, but it is Raman Simsikov. He is chief purchasing inspector for the Passaic County of New Jersey, which is a city right outside of out near Paterson, New Jersey. He's the chief purchasing inspector for the Passaic County, and he is also one of the butchers that they were looking for, and they have him up for trial. And I heard some of his testimony that was on tape, and he says, I couldn't kill a chicken. I couldn't even this.
He's probably right.
Yes, I couldn't do this. I've never done it. You are putting things down that my children and my grandchildren are going to have to think about me for years. But they do have materials listing him there. They listing Schneider there out of they have this woman, there's Walter Schreiber, who was listed out of Dachau experimenting on people. There were women that they had there. There's just an unending amount of Nazis, and this is what we want to deal with today. They are in big business. They're not only in Brazil and Argentina, but of course they are there. La Dignidad is there and all. But this is what we want to deal with today. Now, I've just laid a groundwork of a few things to let you know that these people didn't just sneak in. A lot of Nazis did sneak in using the identities of their victims. But a lot of them were brought to this country by our government and given the okay. Now, this is the same government that right now is saying to you, join the draft, we're behind you, but the patriotism, the whole thing. These are the same people that brought the enemies and the butchers of World War II into our country and put them into various businesses. I would think a long time before I decided to join the draft of anything until I got this cleaned out. And I don't know what would clean our country out at this time, do you?
Well, I think one interesting project would be to take the 642 Nazi scientists that came here from Project Paperclip.
Yeah.
Many are at UCLA, they're at Boston hospitals, they're doing mind experiments, body experiments, chemical, Tulane University, and they're making weapons for Rockwell, Hewlett-Packard, iTech. I have a list of Boeing, Howard Hughes, Westinghouse, Litton Industries. It'd be interesting at Bell Helicopter, where the world's Nazis in the world, Walter Dornberger became the executive of Bell Helicopter in Texas, and the man who owns that, Textron, is the head secretary of our Treasury, Mr. Miller. He was supposed to be hung at Nuremberg, this Dornberger, but instead they brought him to the Dallas-Fort Worth area to make helicopters for the Shah of Iran and for the war in Southeast Asia.
Now, that's very interesting. Here is a man who was tried, convicted by the Nuremberg trial.
Oh, in England they said that they had taped what he was saying in the cells, and that they said he's the drag of humanity, that he should be hung at Nuremberg, and Werner von Braun said, no, I can't come without Dornberger. We made our rocket factories at Peenemünde, and we used people. They brought people in to work, like at Auschwitz, for IG Farben, with no food. They would work, say, 20 days and die till their skin and bones, and they'd bring in the next 20 and die. They didn't have to have any food because they'd work them till they die, take them off.
They had enough.
When they went into Peenemünde, there was just nothing but piles of bones, just bones, And von Braun and Dornberger headed that and those rocket factories. But
then they came to our country.
So then he was supposed to be hung. The British said he has an intent to have the Third Reich, the Fourth Reich, another war. He's, arrogant. He never should be released. And von Braun said, no, I won't come if Dornberger doesn't come with me. So von Braun went to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, to begin the NASA program. And Dornberger became the executive of Bell Helicopter for the war, making helicopters for Southeast Asia. Now it's the Middle East, and then it'll be Africa, and it'll be the United States, the whole world. I would think that one of the interesting things would be to get a list of Project Paperclip for the government to say, okay, it's been this many years. They came over in 1945, 46. Give us their name, what city they live in, how they were employed, and how much money they make today. I bet each one of those is making 40 to 60 to 80 or 100 or 200,000 a year. I bet they're teaching at Stanford, the University of California, here in Berkeley, UCLA, Harvard, Yale, or Princeton, just like the Kissinger family brought in from Germany, and he pieces up the world for the Rockefellers, It would be nice to know where they are, how much money they made while we are impoverished, while our education system goes down, while there's dopes on the streets, there's high inflation, we're facing another war.
Yeah, that's
okay, let's see if they are. But the point is, find the industries where they continued the desire to make war against Russia again. Napoleon wanted it, Kaiser wanted it, Hitler wanted it. So they come to this country to gear us up for another war of slaughter.